When it comes to Vinland Saga, if you had to ask me who was the worst character and who was the character I hated the most seeing because of everything they've done, my answer would be none other than Ketil. And that is saying something considering just how brutal the world of Vinland Saga can be sometimes, and not to mention how in season 1 we did get a good antagonist that we didn't like to see as well, this being Askeladd. But the difference between Askeladd and Ketil is the fact that while Askeladd did so many terrible things and there's no justification for everything he did during his time in this series, at the same time he could sometimes be wise, and this is shown greatly between his relationship of him and Thorfinn. And for those who have watched Vinland Saga, you know exactly why. This being that Thorfinn has a hatred towards Askeladd because of him being responsible for the death of his father. But throughout the journey between Askeladd and Thorfinn, while Askeladd has given Thorfinn multiple times to get his revenge, it was never completed, and oftentimes Thorfinn failed in getting his revenge against Askeladd. But while Thorfinn was so obsessed with getting his revenge against Askeladd, Askeladd at the same time was kind of in a way teaching Thorfinn that the path that he was taking was not the right one, which is kind of ironic considering this is Askeladd we're talking about, and he was the one that was responsible for destroying many people's villages, this including their lives as well. But when Askeladd was saying all this, he actually meant it because he did not want Thorfinn to follow the same path as he did. He didn't want him to follow the path of destruction and chaos, because deep down, Askeladd probably did not want to live this life anymore, but he felt that he had no other choice because for him, life was unfair, and sometimes you would have to do things in life that you didn't want to do at all, just for the sake of surviving and being able to live another day. And while this was the life that he chose to live, he did not want the same for Thorfinn, which is why in a way, while Askeladd is a villain, he's also a very complex villain, because while he was Thorfinn's enemy, he was also in a way Thorfinn's father figure and Thorfinn's mentor at the same time, trying to help Thorfinn realize that his revenge plan is no longer worth it and that he should just be doing something else with his life. And this is the exact same advice he even gave him during his final moments when he was still alive. But with Ketil, on the other hand, you can't say the exact same thing, because Ketil was just by far the worst of the worst in every way once you got to truly know who he really was. When we are first introduced to Ketil, he seems like a very ordinary guy, and there's nothing really bad to say about him at first. In fact, during his conversations with both Thorfinn and Einar, who during this part of the story, Thorfinn was a slave for his farm and Einar was just a slave that he recently bought, but will be a character that we will heavily focus on in Vinland Saga Season 2, he reassures them that once they are able to complete their jobs and complete all the tasks that are given to them, then they'll be able to be set free and do whatever they want with their lives. Essentially, Ketil was reassuring them that he believed that slaves should be given the chance for freedom and fair treatment. And while this all seems nice at first, cracks started to show about who Ketil is as a person and what really was going on behind the scenes when no one is looking. One of the things that we get to find out very quickly about Ketil is that he is really greedy and doesn't really think far ahead, and nobody says this better than his own father, who believes this exact same thing as well. As when Ketil was given the farm, he decided to expand the farm beyond its capacity, which not only resulted in them having a bigger farm than what they needed, but now it required a lot of protection as well. And by doing this resulted in Ketil now having to ask for royal protection from the king in order to prevent thieves from getting into his farm. But if Ketil was just a greedy man who had no idea what he was doing with his farm, then this wouldn't really make him a terrible person. But as the story continues and we start to learn more things about Ketil, our views on him start to change drastically. Another thing that we come to find out about Ketil is that he is not an honest man, as he spent a good portion of his life making people believe that he was the infamous warrior known as the Iron Fist Ketil, a man that is said to be a beast when it came to being in the battlefield, in which the stories say that he managed to kill people with just simply his fists. However, Ketil was not this warrior, and in fact, this is something that we will later find out was just Ketil's way in making people fear him, because really, as a person, he's not somebody that you would really be afraid of, as one of the things that Ketil made sure that no one really found out about him was that he was in fact weak and scared in many things. And this becomes even more more clear when he is told to give a punishment to two slaves who are still kids, by the way, named Stur and Thora, in which they were caught stealing from the farm and had to be punished because of it. But Ketil was reluctant to do so, and while this was the case for him, this was not the case for his son Thorgil, in which he's another case in and of itself. But to make things short, his son Thorgil was very prone to violence and had no problems with being violent to people who he felt deserved it. And in this case, he felt that violence was the only way to truly punish these two kids. And you would think, as Ketil being the leader and essentially the person in charge, he would be the one to intervene and tell his son that he's the one making the decisions and that he should not be involved whatsoever. But that's not what happens, and it's quite the opposite really, because Ketil does nothing about his son, and in reality Ketil admits that he's actually in fact afraid of his own son. So when Thorgil was giving the punishment to this slave, more specifically towards the slave that was the boy Stur, he did not hold back. It was so brutal, in fact, that while Ketil was horrified in what he was witnessing, he did not do anything to intervene. In fact, he just sat there and watched as his son was being violent towards somebody that did not stand a chance against him. It wouldn't be until somebody else intervened that Ketil will finally do something. But of course, Thorgil was able to get away from this action that he did because, once again, his father had no intentions of confronting his son, showing once again how truly scared he was of his own son. The fact that he let his son continue harming him to the point that had no one intervened, he most likely would have died. This greatly shows that when it comes to conflicts and having to face an issue head on, he does not want to face it, and in fact he just rather run away. What Ketil proved in these moments was that instead of being the leader that he is supposed to be and finding a solution to this, he would rather pretend that there's no problem whatsoever or try to forget it as quickly as possible. And instead of making the decisions for everybody, he would rather have everybody else around him do the decisions for him, because for him it's just simply too much to handle. But it seems that at some point Ketil wasn't always a coward, as we get to find out through his father that happened many years ago that Ketil and a woman from the village used to really love each other. But by then, a man who goes by the name of Ebb had interest in this woman, leading to him wanting this woman and marrying her, due to him having power and worrying that this could cause conflict between them, causing irreversible damage. At the time when Ketil's father was still in charge, he decided to simply obey the orders and give the girl to Ebb, something that Ketil was not in agreement with, as he wanted to fight till the very end for the woman he loved, showing that at some point in his life he felt that he had to fight to get the things he wanted and what he felt was the right course of actions. But during the wedding day with this woman and his new husband, he was attacked by none other than people who were against him as well, causing everybody involved in the wedding to die, including the woman that Ketil used to love. And these chain of events most likely affected Ketil, and you would think that after seeing all these very disturbing things happening around him and not doing a thing about it, this will be what really made him become just a truly hateable character that you don't even want to look at and see any longer. Things only get worse from here, and this, I think, really this moment alone that we're about to talk about is what truly made me despise this character even more, which you would think would be impossible to do by now. But what happened with the woman known as Arnheid really cemented that I hope that the worst things were to happen to Ketil and that karma gets him back for everything that he did with the woman that he supposedly cared for and would never want something bad happen to her at all. Remember when I said that Ketil believed that slaves should be given an opportunity for freedom and that they should be able to do what they want with their lives? Well, that was for all the slaves except for Arnheid, who he believed was somebody that only belonged to him, and used her as a sex slave and as a coping mechanism as well when things were too much for him and he had to look for something to be comforted with. And this sadly was what Arnheid had to do, and Ketil made it very clear that he had no intention of ever setting her free and letting her do what she wanted to do with her life. But after a meeting gone wrong with the new king, this being King Canute, in which King Canute had no intentions of negotiating with him and planned very clearly to take over the farm in order to take care of some of the country's expenses, all things went downhill as Thorgil and his other son Omar were responsible for killing some of Canute's men, one of them included being Canute's messenger. Of course, with this just made King Canute have even more reason to take over the farm as a punishment for what his sons did. And just like the coward he is, Ketil decides to run away to his farm, realizing that things are about to end very soon, and it's only a matter of time before King Canute sends his army to the farm to take it over once and for all. But this wouldn't be the only bad news for him, because he will also come to find out once he returns to the farm, he gets the news that Arnheid tried to escape with her husband Gardar, but sadly was unsuccessful. This would just be the breaking point for Ketil, and once he sees Arnheid once again, the worst thing that you could ever imagine doing to somebody who's defenseless and can't have an equal fight, Ketil decides to punish Arnheid by beating her relentlessly, as in his twisted mind he believed that Arnheid took his kindness for granted and was being a selfish person. And when I say this was really hard to watch, I mean it, because despite this not lasting too long, thanks to the intervention of Snake, who stopped him from beating this poor woman any longer, the damage was done, as in that short amount of time, Arnheid was severely beaten to the point that it seemed that she was in the verge of death. And sadly, while everything was done to make sure that she still survived and didn't succumb to her injuries, ultimately that's what happened, and Arnheid passed away. And all you can feel in these moments is just sadness and frustration, especially after what happened to her before she became a slave. She lost everything. When Vikings came and attacked her village, she not only was separated from her son, but also her husband. And as if things couldn't get even more disturbing, we also came to find out that Arnheid was pregnant with Ketil's child. But when Ketil was beating her relentless, she of course lost it during that sequence of events. So not only was Ketil responsible for the death of his own child, he was now responsible for the death of the woman he was so dependent on and felt that he couldn't live without her, was now laying dead, all because of his terrible actions and his poor decision making. So no surprise, it was very satisfying to see the downfall of Ketil and everything that he built up until this point, because once King Canute came with his army to take over the farm, while he tried his very best with his group of people to prevent that from happening, ultimately Canute had the upper hand. Yes, despite even him having his own son Thorgil, who was very skillful when it came to battles, not to mention Snake as well, it was still not enough for King Canute to be taken down, as he had the best of the best when it came to fighters, but he also had a plan for any kind of scenario that were to happen. And once Ketil woke up after being knocked out during the battle, he not only came to find out that Arnheid died, but also that his younger son Olmar took over the farm and decided to give up and surrender to King Canute in return for the fighting to stop, as Olmar knew that at this point it was a losing battle, which once again it was very great to see, especially that it came from the son that many considered to be a coward and had nothing of value in him. Olmar showed in these moments that while he was still scared, he decided to be a man about it and realized that no matter what they did, they were never really going to win. That was the reality that they had to face right now, that they lost and they lost clean. Something that sadly his father wasn't able to comprehend, because he tried his very best till the very end, despite knowing that this was all going to end in complete failure. And even though Olmar was confronted by Thorgil, in which he did not approve of his decision whatsoever, he still stood tall and made sure to make it clear that he was not going to back out of his decision, and this was the final say, and no matter what happened, nothing was going to change this decision, proving that Olmar was going to be something that his father was not, and that is a man. And while Thorgil was of course there to call him a coward, that was not really true. That is actually being an adult and making sure that he had to face the problems that were happening right in front of them instead of ignoring them, something that his father wouldn't have done, and he still would have probably been blinded to believe that they still had a chance in this battle between them and King Canute. And this is something that even his own father points out, that Ketil had everything, but because of his stupid decisions and because of him being a coward, he lost everything in the matter of seconds. And now, while his youngest son still has a lot of things left to learn, he has proven himself to be the actual man of the family. Unlike his father and his brother, who couldn't see the bigger picture and realized that they were trash human beings, Olmar realizes that while he is a coward, he can still make things right, and from now on, his dreams of becoming a warrior that he so wished he was, because he looked up to his brother Thorgil, were just completely evaporated, as he doesn't want to be a warrior anymore, seeing just how violent and just how many lose their lives in these meaningless battles, or some people become victims of these meaningless battles once everything has been settled. And while we wish the best of luck to Olmar, the same can be said for Ketil, as we hope that this haunts him for the rest of his life, realizing that he could never be the person that he ever wanted to be, how his son is going to be a much more better person than he is, and how the person that he's viewed as a coping mechanism and somebody that he was emotionally dependent on lost her life due to his own terrible actions. It's safe to say that Ketil will not be missed, and while of course it sucks that he's able to see another day unlike Arnheid, it's still great to know that he will never forget everything that happened in these moments, how he lost everything in the blink of an eye, and how the reason where he's at now is all his doing. It's all his fault. He has nobody to blame but his own self, and the world will be a better place if he stays at rock bottom and is never in control of anything ever again. And with that, that's the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.